message tonight. Just a simple thought out of the book of Judges, chapter number 2. Judges, chapter 2. Judges chapter 2. I want to read the first 10 verses here. And we're going to kind of center around and think about verse number 10. Verse number 1 says, "And an angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim, and said, I made you to go up out of Egypt, and have brought you unto the land which I swear unto your father. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your side, and their gods shall be a snare unto you. And it came to pass when the angel of the Lord spake these words unto all the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voice and wept. And they called the name of the place Bochim." If you look down, you have a Ryrie Bible, he gives the translation of that name Bochim as being the weeper. And they sacrificed there unto the Lord. And when Joshua had let the people go, the children of Israel went every man to his inheritance to possess the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord that he did for Israel. Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old, and they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the Mount of Ephraim, on the north side of the hill Gaash. And also all that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel." Now, in Deuteronomy, chapter number 7, we won't take time to go read that, but God gave the commandment that when you go into Canaan land, when you go to inherit the place that I've given you, he said to drive out all the enemies in the land. Get rid of them. Kick them out. Fight with them. War with them. Get rid of them. Certainly God would fight the battles for them. You remember when they came to Jericho, it seemed it's so miraculous, so wonderful what God did there at Jericho. How that he didn't tell them to take up arms and get hammers and start beating the wall down and start with a pickaxe trying to knock the wall down, or try to get an arrow or something and try to shoot the guards off the walls or anything like that. He told them to march around Jericho 7 times. He said to do that for 7 days. On the 7th day, march around Jericho 7 times. For the trumpets to sound and the people to shout. And you know the song, the walls came tumbling down. Amen. And so that was the command. That was God's command to the children of Israel as they would go in to possess Canaan land, the inheritance. But we find out when you read Judges chapter number 1, of course in the book of Joshua, you read of several instances. But in Judges chapter number 1, you read and you see about how these tribes are going to their place of inheritance, and they're not driving out the people. They're not driving out the enemy. And so it's caused a big problem. Of course, when most of the time, and I've said it before, most of the time, when you go in amongst evil people, when you infiltrate yourself to them, most likely you're going to turn the way they are. You're not going to go into the bar and change everybody in the bar. What's going to happen? If anybody changes, it's going to be you. You're going to go in there. You're going to start seeing things evil and devilish. And so that's why God wanted them to drive out the enemy. But he says there in chapter 2, in Judges 2, verse number 2, he said, "But ye have not obeyed my voice." You haven't done what I told you to do. He said, "Ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altar, but ye have not obeyed my voice." Well, we see that in the book of Judges is full of it. It's full of all this, sinning, suffering, supplication, salvation. It's like a roller coaster. And so the book of Judges is full of all this. And it kind of depicts the children of Israel drifting away from God. We see it sometimes they're close to God, but other times it seems like they've drifted away from God. Well, this right here is the very beginning of all that happening. It is because they did not drive out the enemies of the land. Well, there was great consequence for not obeying God. There were problems that arose because they did not obey God. Look at verse number 7. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua. People need leadership. Amen. From the pastor to the teacher to the deacons and to every one of us has responsibility as children of God to be leaders. Amen. And so as long as Joshua was alive, the people served the Lord. And it says in all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, those that served alongside of Joshua, who had seen the great works of the Lord. They had witnessed the Red Sea being parted. They had witnessed the great things that God had done in the wilderness. But it says that this generation dies. Joshua dies. The generation that served along beside him died. Of course, in Numbers 13 and 14, we find out that they were not allowed to go into Canaan land, or they would not flourish there in Canaan land. Thank God, Joshua and Caleb, they had the testimony. They had a different spirit about them, and wanted. They knew that they could go in. They knew that God had given them that land. But here, Joshua and those elders that served with him, they died. Joshua the son of Nun, verse number 8, the servant of the Lord died, being 110 years old, and they buried him. But then in verse number 10, also all that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord. That ought to scare us to death. It ought to make us fearful for our children, grandchildren, for those, and everybody's kind of in a generation class today. I'm Gen X, I think. I don't know about all that, but there's a generation after. There's always a generation after, and I worry about my children, and especially my grandchildren that are not born yet. But I worry about them. Did I teach my children about the Lord? Do my children know the Lord? And do they know enough about Him that when they have children, that they're going to introduce their children to the Lord? My grandchildren, I want them to know the Lord. Amen. And so it's sad here to find out that the generation after Joshua and after those that served along with him would come along and they would know not the Lord. And they would not know the works which He had done for Israel, in specifically in bringing them out of Egypt. Well, I tell you, drifting away from God is it's scary. And so we see the children of Israel drifting from God. Look, think about the direction of this drifting. Number one, it's away from God. It's a drifting away from God. I tell you, we need to be near the Lord. Everything that we teach our children and grandchildren and the generations to come. We need to leave something behind that they will know to stay near the Lord. Amen. If we drift away from God, there is absolutely no hope for a generation that drifts away from God. I was reading an article this week, and it was talking about the 10 biggest religions. The 10 biggest religions in the world. You know what number 4 was? Atheism. That goes to show that there are no true atheists. They are a religion of their own. I tell you, it is scary to think that the 4th biggest religion in this world, 7, 8 billion people, something like that, in this world, and 4%, or number 4 on that list, is people that claim to not believe God, to not believe in God, to not to think that there's not an afterlife, that you just live this life how you want to, and when you die, you just die, you just cease to exist, and that there's nothing else in eternity. I tell you, it ought to scare us to death to think that our children or grandchildren could drift so far away from God that there is no God. Also drifting down. The direction of that is down. First, 2 Timothy chapter number 3. Paul talked about perilous times. He talked about people ever learning, never coming to the knowledge of the truth. He talked about evil men waxing worse and worse and worse. And this world is trying to get better. It's trying to get better and trying to get better by worldly means. But you cannot get better when you're drifting away from God. When you're drifting away from God, all the things that you're trying to do better is just leading you down. It's leading you spiritually down. It'll leave you down in the gutters. It'll leave you depressed. It'll leave you wondering. All the money in the world doesn't do anything for somebody that's depressed. It doesn't do anything for somebody that has absolutely no hope. It doesn't do anything for those that seem like they have the world, the tiger by the tail. It doesn't do anything for them. I tell you, that downward motion, that downward spiritual condition of people, it brings you down. It brings you down. You know what they're left with at the end of their life? They're left with a bank account that's full of money. They're left with a house on the lake that's worth $25 million. They're left with, they're left with great businesses. They're left with all the things this world has to offer, and yet they're going down. They're going down. That rich man in Luke chapter 16, he had everything this world had to offer, and yet he opened his eyes in hell. He went down. And so the direction of drifting from God, it's away from God and down and down. There's also a distance in that drifting. I tell you, I've got a kayak. I haven't been on it since the kidney transplant. I tell you, you get on that kayak, the wind starts to blow a little bit, and you begin to start drifting. And the next thing you know, your wave, you think you're going slow. You think you're just easily drifting along. The next thing you know, you're on the other side of the lake. You know the distance of drifting away from God. Matter of fact, Romans chapter number 1, Paul talks about the step, the downward step to the Gentile unbelief. You know where it winds up? It winds up with the reprobate mind. It winds up somebody living in their own wisdom, in their own power, their own strength, living for themselves, by themselves, trusting in things other than God, and where it leads them to is so far away from God that they'll never get saved. I think that's sad. That's beyond my comprehension. I believe that God will save anybody. I believe, as sure as I'm standing here, that God will save anybody. But those that get so far away from God, to where they're described as a reprobate mind, a reprobate life, a reprobate heart. They will never get saved. They never see. They've got a hold on this world so tightly that they never see the need of Jesus Christ. Then there's a danger of drifting. It's dangerous. It is dangerous for a generation to drift away from God. It is dangerous for a generation to not know God. Do you know that, at all times, of course we know this has never happened. God's always got a remedy. But if you think about it in worldly terms, this world is a generation away from not knowing God at all. If none of us that are alive today would carry on the good old gospel of Jesus Christ, the great news, the good story, the redemptive story of Christ. If our generation, those of us who are alive today and are responsible for those that are coming after, if we never shared the Bible, if we never shared God, we logically thinking, we could be one generation away from no knowledge of God. It's dangerous. A generation that's drifted that far away that there is a loss of truth. So-called Christians today are so devoid of the truth that it is scary. The knowledge of this right here is so lacking in Christian churches today. It is scary to think about those that attempt to worship the Lord on Sunday morning, but they never looked at this through the week. They attempt to worship the Lord on Sunday morning, but you walk into a congregation and not one person, not even the preacher, has a copy of one. The preacher, that don't have. I walked into a church one time, just as far out of God's will as I ever have been. I walked in with a King James Bible under my arm. And I can tell you, I walked in there and sat down. I was the only one. That's the first time I've been to church in 15 years probably. 10 years at least.